Have you ever heard the name Supermarine Spitfire? Maybe you've seen it in a textbook, a museum, or a dusty World War II documentary. But what if I told you this legendary bird of the skies, once the sword of Britain, found a second life in the skies of India? What if I told you that this was not just a fighter, but a symbol of rebirth, resilience, and real Indian aviation history? Imagine it. A machine built in the flames of war, designed to tear through clouds with elegance, speed, and surgical precision. Its wings curved like a raptor in mid-hunt. Its roar, not just the sound of an engine but of resistance. And yet, it soared not only over London, Berlin, or France, but eventually, over the vast skies of an independent India. Pause. Think. Why would a post-colonial nation keep a symbol of empire in its skies? Because this fighter, the Supermarine Spitfire, was more than British engineering. It was global aviation genius. It was a phoenix. And for India in the 1940s and 50s, it was the answer to an immediate challenge, defending the newly born republic with speed and precision. It wasn't just about having planes. It was about having pride. And that pride flew on elliptical wings. The first few Spitfires entered Indian skies before independence, during World War II, flown by Indian pilots fighting alongside the Allies. And then, after 1947, these warbirds didn't retire. They took on new colors, new missions, and new meaning. Indian squadrons painted the Ashoka Chakra on their sides and launched into missions over Kashmir, Ladakh, and beyond. These aircraft, once defenders of Britain, became protectors of India. And their performance? Let me tell you, this was no aged warrior. With a Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, arguably one of the greatest piston engines ever made, the Spitfire could still reach 370 miles per hour, climb at over 4,500 feet per minute, and dance in the air with agility modern jets still envy. For Indian pilots, it was both a challenge and a dream. Handling this aircraft required grace and guts, and Indian aces had both. One pilot once said, "Flying a Spitfire over Kashmir felt like holding the lightning of Indra in your hands." Its curved wings weren't just aesthetic. They allowed for tighter turns, reduced drag, and beautiful roll response. The bubble canopy gave Indian pilots unparalleled 360-degree visibility during combat. And the gun's 8.303 caliber machine guns, or later cannon upgrades, were precise, rapid, and unforgiving. But the real story, the human one. In the late 1940s, India faced threats on its borders. The partition had left scars. Pakistan was pushing into Kashmir. India needed eyes in the sky, wings in the cold. And the Spitfire, this beautiful British bird, gave India what it needed: control. From border patrols to combat support, it was a frontline guardian. When people think of legendary fighter jets, the name Supermarine Spitfire echoes across history like a whisper of triumph and sacrifice. Most often remembered as the iconic dogfighter of the Battle of Britain, the Spitfire story is far richer and more global than many realize. While its silhouette may scream British pride, its wings once carried the colors of another emerging power, India. The journey of the Spitfire from the European skies to the South Asian theater is a story of legacy, adaptation, and unlikely alliances. It is the story of how a post-colonial air force forged its early capabilities using the very machine once used to defend empire. Designed in the 1930s by R.J. Mitchell, the Supermarine Spitfire was conceived as a response to rising threats in Europe. With its graceful elliptical wings, the Spitfire was not just an aircraft. It was a revolution in design. Its Rolls-Royce Merlin engine delivered unmatched performance at high altitudes, making it an apex predator in the skies. During World War II, it became the backbone of the Royal Air Force's RAF Fighter Command, especially in the summer of 1940, when Britain stood alone against the Luftwaffe. What is less known, however, is that the Spitfire was also deployed in the Eastern Theater in Burma, Malaya, and India. By 1944, several Spitfire squadrons were stationed in the Indian subcontinent under the RAF's Southeast Asia Command. These were not merely training or reconnaissance units. They participated in offensive air campaigns against Japanese positions, providing air cover for ground troops, engaging in air-to-air combat, and conducting high-risk strafing runs over dense jungle terrain. As the war progressed, Indian pilots increasingly joined the RAF ranks, and by 1945, entire squadrons like No. 1 and No. 4 of the Indian Air Force, IAF, were flying Spitfires. These pilots, many trained in Britain, mastered the aircraft's nuances, turning it into an instrument of tactical precision. Their involvement in key operations like the Arakan campaign and the Imphal Kohima battles laid the groundwork for the professional Air Force India would become post-independence. With India's independence in 1947, the transition of power was not just political, it was also technological and military. The fledgling Indian Air Force inherited a variety of aircraft from the departing British, among which the Spitfire was one of the most prized. Unlike the newer jet-age aircraft just entering the global arena, the Spitfire remained relevant in the region due to its robustness, adaptability, and familiarity among Indian pilots. The post-independence years were tumultuous. The partition had not only split territories but had also fractured military assets. The IAF needed immediate operational capability, especially in the skies over Kashmir, where hostilities broke out almost immediately. In this environment, Spitfires became more than relics, they became frontline warriors. Armed with .303 Browning machine guns and sometimes 20mm Hispano cannons, Spitfires conducted air patrols, supported ground troops, and defended airspace in critical northern regions. Technically, the Spitfire variants flown by India were mostly Mk-8, Mk-14, and some Mk-18 versions, all featuring enhanced fuel capacity, pressurized cockpits, and upgraded engines. These modifications made them suitable for operations at higher altitudes and in more rugged conditions than their European counterparts. Their dogfighting legacy was preserved, but their missions expanded, from interception to ground support and even photo reconnaissance. The Spitfire also played a cultural role in the early years of Indian aviation. Air shows, public displays, and ceremonial flypasts often featured these sleek machines. They became symbols of strength, heritage, and aspiration. Their presence at Indian military academies and airbases inspired a generation of young cadets to dream of the skies. They weren't just war machines, they were national icons. By the early 1950s, the Spitfire's era was coming to an end. The arrival of jet aircraft like the de Havilland Vampire and later the Hawker Hunter marked a technological leap. The Indian Air Force, eager to modernize, began phasing out piston-engine fighters in favor of jets. But even as they were retired from active service, many Spitfires found new homes. Some in museums, others as gate guardians, and a few sold to private collectors. Interestingly, some of the finest surviving examples of Spitfires today, fully restored, airworthy, and flying in air shows across the UK and US, actually originated from India. In the 1970s and 80s, aviation enthusiasts and restoration experts began acquiring old Indian Air Force Spitfires, many of which were still structurally sound due to the dry storage conditions in the Indian subcontinent. These aircraft, restored to their World War II glory, now perform aerial acrobatics at events like Duxford and Oshkosh, telling stories that began thousands of miles away in Indian skies. The Spitfire's influence on Indian military aviation is subtle but enduring. It instilled a culture of precision flying, situational awareness, and respect for air superiority. The experiences gained by Indian pilots flying Spitfires directly contributed to the professionalism and doctrine of the IAF in subsequent decades. In fact, several Indian air marshals who shaped the IAF's Cold War posture were former Spitfire pilots. Its role in shaping India's aerial defense during its formative years cannot be overstated. And now, decades later, people still marvel when they see a Spitfire at air shows or static displays. But what they don't realize is that for a time, in a critical moment, this machine helped shape the identity of Indian air superiority. It bridged the past with the future. And speaking of the future, did you know India now fields fifth-generation fighter tech, stealth capabilities, and cutting-edge avionics? If that interests you, check out the next video linked in the description, where we cover India's rise from Spitfire to superpower with jets like the AMCA, Tejas Mk2, and more. But for now, pause again. And picture this: an Indian pilot, barely 25, flying this roaring machine over the snow-capped Himalayas. He looks down, sees contested terrain, sees soldiers relying on his eyes, his speed, and his precision. And then, With a gentle roll and a throttle push, he dives. Swift, sure, silent but thunderous. This wasn't just a fighter jet. This was India's wings when it needed them most. So if this story moved you, if it surprised you, if it made you look at a vintage aircraft in a whole new light, then do the following right now. Backhand index pointing right, smash that like button to show your love for military aviation history. Memo, drop a comment and tell us. Did you ever imagine a British Spitfire guarding Indian skies? Bell and hit subscribe for more forgotten legends and rising giants of air power from across the globe. Because on this channel, we don't just show you jets. We fly through history. We dive into forgotten wars. We resurrect stories that were buried in hangars and hang onto the wings of time. And remember, this story isn't over. Check the description below for a deep dive into India's next-gen fighter. A machine that carries the legacy of the Spitfire, but with stealth, power, and supersonic vision. This is not nostalgia. This is evolution, and you're invited to fly along.